And a very good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to a Lyceum evening. And this is coming to you from the Paul Spiritualist Church, and we're down on the south coast of the UK. Great delight to welcome back to our platform here, Leonard Tatt.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Len. Len, I've had the great pleasure of hosting, and he was part of one of our rally series here. Huge amounts of information there. So I'm really looking forward to this evening's conversation. Len, if you could just give a brief history of Len, please.
A brief history. Well, I've been involved in my spiritual development, for over 36 years. 36 years ago, I started, in earnest to study spiritualism when I walked through the Arthur Findlay College for the first time. But that journey has taken me in all sorts of ways and avenues of research, shall I say. I was a Catholic priest for quite a while, a working medium for a very long while. I've done academic research. I've got a master's degree in theology, which also encompassed philosophy. So I've been involved in this, movement for most of my life, and it's very close, to my heart, as is the subject that we're going to talk about tonight, which is God. The first principle of spiritualism, which has really, been the principle that I've lived my life by, and I think is very, very important. And even after 36 years, I'm only just beginning to, to fresh some of this stuff out and to understand it. I wanted to share some of this, development with you tonight. So, so that's me.
Absolutely wonderful. I can't wait for this. I've always found you a fantastic repository of knowledge, of information, and I know by the end of tonight probably my brains are going to be oozing out of my ears again. So absolutely wonderful.
It's a fascinating subject, and it's huge. There's so many different directions and ways that our conversation could develop. So I'm excited by that too.
Good. Apologies, I'm a bit distracted there. One of the streams wasn't working, so I've just had to do an adjustment there. So welcome anybody who's just joined us on the church page. Len, the title of tonight about how do we encounter God in our mediumship and the first principle. I mean, number one, it's really nice to hear the word God mentioned again.
Yep. I think some of the problem, that was partly what I wanted to talk about first, is some of the problem is of our misunderstanding about God or what God is, which is what I, will fresh out in a few moments. But I believe, and this is partly why it's taken, my development has taken such a long time, is that it takes us a great deal of time to overcome our false images and impressions of what God is. So therefore, how can we know if we've encountered God? And some of those impressions, those false ideas, are not just personal; they're ingrained in our society and in our religion and in our world. So we actually get bombarded by them, in all sorts of ways. And one of the first ones that comes to mind for me is Santa Claus. This idea of a God who's making a list and checking it twice, looking to see who's naughty or nice. And then we all get this idea that and you hear this often in religious circles, oh, I've got to get right with God. I've got to do something to please God or get myself into heaven or live a spiritual life. And all of those things, are neither needed, warranted, because you can't be outside of God. You can't do anything to get yourself into heaven. And we know with spiritualism, that everybody, survives physical death. But how? How do we survive physical death? What is it that we go to? What is it that awaits us when we pass this life? And I think that the whole idea of looking for evidence and just proving that we survive physical death can lead us down a rabbit hole of not looking at those other aspects of spiritualism, which are so important.
So true. And going back to the God theory, we do this plea bargaining, don't we? Consciously or unconsciously. If I'm good for you, God, then I'm going to go for heaven. If I do this, I'm going to go.
And I think we've all done that in times of crisis. That time when we look to heaven, and say, if you do this for me, then I will, live this way, or I will, and of course, in the Bible, you've got so many instances of that where, you've got this idea that, it's God that wins battles and God's on our side. And if God is, on our side, who can be against us? Well, of course, in every war, God's on every side. And I mean, even the SS on their belts had God is on our side, which was written there, and they believed that was the case. And then what tends to happen with that sort of a belief is that we would then read backwards into whatever's happened. And when I was talking to you there about this earlier. That during before the Second World War, spiritualism became very, very predominant in Germany. Of course, they'd lost the First World War, and there are all sorts of reasons for that. Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky's teaching became very predominant, especially in aristocratic circles. And you had Rudolf Steiner, who was attracting huge crowds, there. And we had then all this idea of Hyperborea and Mu and Atlantis, these ancient civilizations where there'd been a utopia. And if we got that utopia back, then, the world would become a utopia once more, which again goes back to these false images that we have of God, of this utopia. It comes from St. Augustine, the idea of original sin, that mankind somehow at the beginning fell, and now we've got to get ourselves back to this utopia, where God is, which of course, doesn't exist. It's sort of our innate yearning for the womb once more. You find this very much in Freud, the idea that within the room psychologically we're cocooned, we're looked after and cared for and safe. And then of course when we come out of the womb and we start developing an identity, we realize that we're not safe, and that we're in a world where there's suffering and where there's separation and where there's all sorts of perils that we yearn for. And that is one of our longings, just like this longing and yearning for God. And in certain circles in the world, the idea, and there's been a great many books that have been written on on this subject. In certain circles, that war was seen as being a fight between Christianity and spiritualism. And then before the war, Findlay had written his books about spiritualism. You'd had this investigation into the healing of people like Harry Edwards, which the Anglican Church had found very favourably, in. And of course, this was led into a great deal of disrepute because of Hitler's championing of some of these ideas and some of these thoughts. but it was then retrospectively believed that, well, of course, the war was won by the West, so therefore God was on the side of Christianity. So we can then quash all of, that was believed there. And it was, very much. You can't get Findlay's books, as great as they are. I mean, one of his best books was The Curse of Ignorance. If you've got the stamina and patience to plow through it, and then on the edge of the etheric, where he places the spirit world, and gives us this idea of of frequency and vibration, and they're very well written. But you can't go into a British library and get one. And how many people know about the investigation of Harry Edwards done by the Anglican Church? There was recently a very interesting book written by an Anglican priest, because they had a great deal more involvement and more freedom to investigate spiritualism than was in the Catholic Church. And she's written about the Anglican Church's involvement in spiritualism. But most of those problems came from this, from these false understandings about God, which sometimes we reinforce again in spiritualism. If you think of the wording of our principle, the fatherhood of God. Well, God isn't father, because what about the mother? God isn't, and that again, if we look at Eric Newman's work, Eric Newman talks about the development of consciousness. Eric Newman was one of Carl Jung's students. So Jung, who had worked with Freud and worked, in the birth of psychology schools in Germany, his student Eric Newman talked about the development of consciousness through the ages. That first we went from a matriarchal God. So if you look back at all of the ancient priestesses, so you've got, the priestesses in Egypt, which were all female. Then you had the oracles at Delphi, and, and there were very many ancient tribes that had, female priests. But the idea, with the female priest was the idea of, of an embodied God. And we couldn't control all of these urges that had come up, that would come up from our, our unconscious. Our sexual urges were very, very difficult to control. Our appetite was very, very difficult to control. And so the world moved towards a patriarchal God, and moved towards the idea that, well, if we can't contact God through the, through the body, maybe we can contact God through the mind. So you then get the birth of this patriarchal society, which is still very influential in our world today, in huge, huge ways, and lots of them detrimental ways, because it also influences our sexuality, our, our society, our justice system, all sorts of different things. And the belief was that if we contacted God academically, we would then have to leave behind everything that was bodily. So imagination was left behind. And that's where you'll find lots of these religious movements where the priesthood would leave sexuality behind, so that they would, live a celibate life, which again, you'll see not just in the Catholic Church, but in, Hindu religions with a Brahmin, in Buddhism, in all sorts of ways. But of course, we now know that you can't get to God academically. We'll talk about that a little bit, more as we progress. But you can't get to God through the mind. That there's got to be this combination of, of an embodied spirituality, which combines the mind and the body, or the mind and the heart, if you like, which is very, very big in Buddhism, where they understand this idea of male and female aspects of the brain, that the female aspect of the brain is intuitive, which is why when we went to patriarchal societies, we left our imagination and our feelings, behind. Added to that, You had the problem that, of course, when you went through war-torn periods, that your feelings, would explode when you saw the horrors of war. And, of course, your academic escapes took you away from that a little bit. They took you, to another world, if you like. So we've got to get back to this idea of uniting, the mind and the body. And of course, the mind isn't just the brain. We know that the brain, is very, very supple. We're living in an era of neurodiversity, but we also know that the brain is an amazing organ that will compensate for all sorts of conditions, that lots of people would think, terminal. And we also know through spiritualism that the mind is able to travel, that the mind can travel. And there's been investigations, especially in America, of using remote viewers and using them for spying on enemies and, to get information that would help a nationalistic cause. And that uniting of mind and heart, is meant to take us a little bit, more forward as a society. Because if we don't combine our heart, if we don't bring together these ideas of, our mental pursuits with love and with those feelings, then what are we? If we don't just survive mentally, there's also an embodied state within the spirit world. What is our first evidence that we give when we're talking of a message, when we're talking of a loved one in the spirit world? We describe their appearance. We describe their physical conditions. Now, that's not just memory. If you read the books of Silver Birch, you'll hear all that idea of, when they come back, to communicate with us, how, those memories come to the fore. But he also used to talk about that, astral body in the spirit world and how that then was left behind as people progressed through the realms and through, their own spiritual development, which continues after we die. It doesn't just, we don't just go to the spirit world, because one thing that we know from spiritualism is that when people die, they are just the same. They've not grown wings and halos and become enlightened beings that can, give you all the information that you need to make your life great, like the lottery numbers or whatever it might be. No, they're exactly the same as they were. They progressed, of course, and they're able to see a little bit further and a little bit more clearly because they're unencumbered by all that the stresses and problems that the physical body brings. But they're in a world where that freedom allows them to flourish and express themselves a little bit more.
Very true. Very true. I know in my works, I'm nosy, and I do often sit and ask, where are you now? Where are you now? And I've had some fantastic little snippets of progression, even through mediumship, when there's been contention on the earth. That communication generally will always come in on the vibration of healing. Because I say, listen, Len, me and you had a huge row, right? We had a big row, I flounce off, and then I go over to the other side. Then I think, do you know what? I've left that undone. I want to say sorry. I can see better now, and I want to say. So it's a perfectly natural thing for people to say, listen, I'm sorry. I can't change it, but I am sorry for where I am now.
Yeah. It's like those wonderful message where you get a husband come from the spirit world, and the wife that receiving the message says, "Well, I didn't want him when he was alive. I don't want him now. You can tell him to come." But you've got a duty to, because we say we're serving the spirit world, and often, as mediums, we're looking for that. Yes, we're looking for that. Verification that we're getting something that's real and substantial. But our service, we say, is for the spirit world, and yet we forget them. And again, if you look at those, those silver birch books, you'll often, hear, and these sorts of things used to go on at places like the SAGB, which, I've had the privilege of working at regularly, where they would have Christmas tree circles for the children in the spirit world. And they would have such wonderful phenomena that would manifest because they weren't there to get a message of eternal life. They were there to exist with that eternal life and commune with them, which again, one of our principles of spiritualism, the communion of spirits, we often forget. But that then brings us back to this idea of God and what God is, because if we don't get that right, there's going to be all sorts of mistakes and processes that go wrong as we then explore the other principles of spiritualism and are then reflected, in our life. Because if you read the Bible regularly, you can get this idea that God is this being that's got a plan for you. He knows how you're meant to live your life and what you're meant to do. And he knows where you should be and where you should be going, as he has for nations and peoples, and he likes some more than others. And, and all that, of course, is just nonsense. What we're doing as we're progressing, is we're making these decisions and, forging our path. If you like, you could say that there are people in the spirit world that have a dream for you. But if we think of our own children and our own loved ones, our dream is for them to be happy. Our dream is for them to flourish. Our dream is for them to be all that they can be. And all that you can be is a human being fully alive. And that, again, has been one of the tenets of spiritualism, for generations. That if we're a human being fully alive, we're able to love and laugh and live, in all of the myriad of expressions that life brings. And that's what life wants for each and every one of us. And it's this understanding of what God is, that helps us in some way realize that. And it's our letting go of these false beliefs that, shines our soul, if you like, makes the mirror, because we talked of mediumship being the mirror of the mind. Well, if your mind's dirty, if your mirror's dirty, if you like, then it's not going to reflect that love in all its beauty and glory. And that comes back to our, to our understanding of, of what God is. So shall I get to that a little bit, because, it's what we're here for. Right.
I am sat here totally in abeyance to your will, O Master.
Very kind. But yeah, it's this, these ideas of, of God, having everything mapped out, or that we're almost, trying to get back to this original utopia that causes these problems, which I believe are actually running rampant in our world at the moment, where we've got certain, even political circles, that believe they've got the ear of God, that God's directing them to, to certain things, certain actions, and that their pathway has been, ordained from on high, if you like, which, defies belief, really. And again, you can see, I don't need to spell out some of these things. I'm sure people will get the individuals that we're talking about. The idea that they'll then read back on experiences that have happened. Oh, God saved me from the assassin's bullet. God saved me from this big catastrophe. God's given me, and at the moment we're seeing this, very much, in entrepreneurial circles, where if people amass a great fortune, they don't see it as a responsibility to help people. They see it as God rewarding them because of God's great love for them, which again we know, is not the case. the first, I'm going to use a lot of philosophers and great thinkers, lots of them actually from the church as well, because there's been some great thinkers in the church, but nearly all of them within the church have been condemned for heresy at some time or another, whatever that is, and then later on been drawn back into the fold. And you'll see this actually go on with science as well, where within science, today's firm belief is let go of for tomorrow's new theory and new exploration. And we're constantly moving, within these theories and within these, ideas to get a greater understanding of who and what God is, and therefore our place within the universe. And if we went back, to St. Paul, who again was on the edge of the church when it first started, never met Jesus, actually experienced Jesus through a mediumistic encounter where he had a vision and he heard voices. So he had, direct voice experience. But those mediumistic experiences changed his life. But he actually at the time was somebody who was on the edge of, the church and what was going on. And I'll come to what I believe Jesus was doing, which I think St. Paul got in, and I'm using that. That's again my upbringing, where I'm using the title given to him by the Catholic Church, St. Paul. He survived physical death and is now in heaven. Well, we can say that about our aunts or uncles or whoever it is, But Paul does have a great deal that can help us in his writings. And one of the things that he said, which I actually use in every opening prayer, the God in whom we live, move, and have our very being. And I think that is, so important to realize that it's God in whom we live, move, and have our very being. So God's neither male or female, but is everything. And I think the person that, again, got closest to what he was talking about was a Dutch Jewish philosopher called Benedict Spinoza. And Benedict Spinoza, again, was accused of heresy by the Jewish synagogue where he grew up. He was banished because he was talking about the God in whom we live and have our very being. Because when you talk about this, people often mistake that what you're saying is that God is in everything. And that's not what Benedict Spinoza said. One of the interesting things, when Einstein was asked if he believed in God, he said that he believed in Benedict Spinoza's God. That we can encounter God through nature, that we can encounter God in space, that we encounter God, through the world, but an individual substance or an individual thing is not God. So the idea that we encounter God in everything is the idea of pantheism, where we see Wicca and where we see, these ideas of nature worship and, that sort of pre-Christian idea of the gods of the river and the gods of the mountain. Funnily enough, mountains are very, very important in Christianity, because that was where all the theophanies happened, the manifestations or the encounters with God, like Moses on Mount Sinai. And, there's lots and lots of them. Elijah, when he meets God, who again, we get this idea that he encounters God not in the whirlwind, not in the fire, not in the thunderstorm, but in silence. And we'll talk about that, that silence some more. But this idea of pantheism was expanded by Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican friar living in about the 13th century, who used to talk about panentheism, which is the idea of God working through nature, and God being, we can have this encounter, but it's not, you can't worship a river, you can't worship a mountain, but God is there present and is, somehow encountered. And then I want to come on to another 13th century, again a Dominican by the name of Meister Eckhart. So Meister Eckhart, who had all sorts of mystical experiences, he was very, renowned for, some of these experiences which he had, which worried people, at the time. So again, he was investigated by the church, but had the grace to die before they, could make any of their conclusions. But what he talked about was how God was the ground of all being. Now, this is where it gets quite complicated, and I'm trying to put it as simply as I can because it can take a little bit of time to get your mind around this. If you can think of a thing and then think of the substance behind that thing, you're starting to get an idea of what God is. Now, we'll encounter this in quantum physics, where we know that even an atom has intelligence. And if you looked at how, like the evolution of an embryo will start with one cell, then that cell will split into two, then it will split into four, and then one cell decides that it's going to be an ear, another cell would decide that it's going to be a nose, and science cannot explain what it is that it makes that cell decide that it's going to be this or that it's going to be that. So that there's this intelligence, that's running through, all of creation, and we could start to think of that as being, God, and this idea of everything being connected. If we started to look at Jung's collective unconscious, the idea that everything's connected, very much like a spider's web, where when there's something that's maneuvering out on the edges, it's felt in the center, and so on. That this collective unconscious gives us the idea that there's somewhere where we all touch, that's like a pool or a collective of mind, if you like. So we could start to think of God as a mind, but the problem that we then get is that God is not a thing. Okay? God is not, and this is where our mind starts playing tricks on us, because we very, very quickly want, to make God into a thing. God is, Zeus or Deus, that old man sitting on a cloud who's directing the universe. And we'll get this again with Thomas Aquinas, where you had the first cause and the first mover and, the first principle and so on and so forth. And we can take all that, like the first cause, we could take right back to the Big Bang. Okay? In other words, that the universe wasn't formed out of nothing. And I think that this is, religion often says, especially in Hinduism and various other places, our greatest fear is nothing, is emptiness. And that is our fear of death, that when we die, there's nothing, there's just emptiness. That's not the case. This idea that God, who is the ground of all being, is ever seeking to come into life. So again, one of the best analogies really is of water, and this flow going through life, because this power that's God, or that we see through quantum physics, has an intelligence. We find that described so beautifully in the wisdom books, in the Bible, that this wisdom, this intelligence, was there before all time, and it's that wisdom that's directing us, into this flourishing or this abundance of life. But it seems to be forever seeking to flourish in new ways, in diverse ways. It's like it will fill every crack in the pavement with a flower. It will, it will find new ways of expressing itself. We'll find this very much as a wonderful German philosopher who talks about this by the name of Paul Tillich. and he talks about the God, of all being. And this is why, the God of all being is encountered through silence, is encountered because it's not nothing. Even when when we get into space, we know that space is not nothing. It's a something. Okay, and that's why there's communication, because there's a something that it communicates through. In other words, light has to travel through something to get somewhere. And this is what our lives are, is this expression of light, if you like, that's darkened by our false images and false ideas, that's traveling and always will be traveling, and it's going to a greater and greater, understanding of itself. There's another wonderful philosopher, again from around the 15th century in the Netherlands, called Jacob Boehme. And what he talks about is, the God who is consciousness coming into awareness. Okay, so if we can think of God and this idea of the ground of all being as something that's seeking to express itself, but needs to actually gain awareness of what it is to begin that expression and flourish, in whatever form of life it will be and it will become, then we're starting to get an idea of what, what Jacob Boehme is talking about. So God not being a thing is consciousness that's seeking to come into awareness. So what's happening is when we're working with mediumship, and we know, to develop our mediumship, we have to put ourselves in the flow, and that flow is this God that's seeking to express itself, and we have to quieten our mind and touch this. So we're actually encountering through that moment, when we open up to the spirit world, this flow of life, and then we start getting our information. Okay, so the consciousness that's seeking its awareness. So if we think of ourselves, if you like, as being what Jung described us as, was a doorway. So many people start with this idea that, we've got a spark of the divine within us. What Jung said was that we're a doorway of consciousness that is coming into awareness. And if we think of our lives, that's exactly what is happening as we grow older, and as we as we age, we come into awareness. But it's our false ideas and false images, if you like, of who and what we are or what life is that causes all the problems and all these blocks on the way, shall we call it. So what tends to happen, and this is what we've come up with, the issue in spiritualism, is we get fixated on that evidence. But what's actually important is we're encountering this God, and there's a very good reason why God's the first principle of awareness, because without the ground of being, nothing can be, and without it coming into awareness, mediumship couldn't happen. So therefore, through mediumship, we're encountering this God who is bringing our awareness, which never stops growing, never stands still, always seeks to flourish and grow and develop itself. But what we're doing as a spiritual being is we're either one analogy or metaphor that you could use is we're maybe making that door bigger so that this energy can flow more freely, through itself. And then when we encounter somebody else, because the same process is going on in all sorts of ways. It's going on through our creative endeavors, so through art or through literature or, through the movies, and to an extent through politics. Because that process is working too, but it's our ideas, firm beliefs, firm images that get in the way of it doing what it wants to do, which is where the conflict happens. Okay, So if you thought of conflict as being our resistance to this love flowing freely through us, and it must be love. In every religion, that's what we've found. In every, investigation that takes this through to its natural conclusion, we realize that at the center of the universe is love, that seeking expression in every way that it possibly can. And our spiritual endeavor is to allow that love to flow as freely as we possibly can, which happens with us here, with us in the spirit world, in our creative ways. At the heart of politics, that's what's meant to be going on. Politics is meant to be something that's making the world a better place for everyone, so that everyone can flourish with the dignity incumbent upon the human condition. And it's our resistance to that, which comes in political circles in all sorts of different ways. But in our spiritual circles, the more that we're allowing this energy to flow and that we're able to meet a communicator where they are, the better that message will be. And it's our false images that need to be let go of, so that our spiritual development can begin, to flourish. So again, that analogy of the mediumship being the mirror of the mind. So the more that we realize this love, this, natural divinity of life, we start to flourish in our mediumship even more.
Wow. I absolutely, there's so much in there, Len. I'm going to listen.
There's so much in it, but at the moment, so my idea is that this sort of thing deserves a doctoral thesis, and I want to start, working on that in some way or another, because I've rushed through a lot of this that needs to be thrashed out academically, but that could be quite a lot of work. But there's all sorts of different ways and things that need to be looked at for a realization of that, because it will help us in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely. I'm an optimist, I think is the word.
Yep.
And in and through the little that we understand so far in spiritualism, because we certainly do not know it all. And I think where we think we do know it all is bringing these blocks in you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a game changer.
And the thing with that is you realize that there's a place where all religions touch. And this is the thing where, because in every religion, you'll get this idea of sitting in silence so that they can encounter, the ground of all being. And as we encounter that ground of all being, all sorts of things start to happen. And that's where mysticism comes from, because, of course, that mysticism or that phenomena will start to manifest in natural ways, like the levitation of Teresa of Avila. The natural mediumship of Joan of Arc, the Maid Joan, from the 100 Years' War, like the rats and tats of the Wesley brothers, and there's so many different avenues that we can talk about. And that sitting in silence to encounter this ground of all being, you'll find in every religion. You'll find it in Islam, you'll find it in Buddhism, you'll find it in Hinduism, you'll find it everywhere. And one of the things that really shook the Christian missionaries, going around the world in the 15th, 16th century, was they were going there to these places to bring truth, and they found all this phenomena going on. Well, we've got God. How can you have all this phenomena going on? We've come to bring you the truth, and yet you've got all this, levitation and mediumship. We've got to stop all that so that you realize that we've got the truth that you've got to listen to. Well, truth is only, seen through this love. It's a little bit like Plato's cave and the idea of there being, these unique streams, if you like justice. I mean, there's a very, very good reason why the woman holding the two scales, is on top of the Old Bailey, because they're meant to judge each case, with justice, which is meant to be blind justice. But at the moment, what we're seeing in those circles isn't this, searching for justice. It's this idea of the most money gets the best lawyer, and so we get a miscarriage of justice because that unique, lady, if you like, of justice is not being allowed to flourish in our world. And that, of course, is where you get the idea of possession from. Because if we're possessed by something that's other than the pure idea of justice, isn't just blind, she's been murdered. And being murdered, she's now no longer in the court system. It's now possessed by a demon, which is less than, the ideal of justice. And we can see that going on we've seen it, especially down, your neck of the woods over the last, week or two. And then people, again, reading back on it, everything that they want, start to use all of these things for their own ends rather than actually, do what's meant to happen, which is the realization that we've got to look after the victim. We've got to show love in this, circumstance, not violence and condemnation, and But how many times can you sit and discuss these things in an adult environment where everybody's voice is heard? And then there lies half of our problems in the world, because this ground of all being, if you like, is we don't realize is seeking to flourish in those divine ways, which we all know in our heart what they are. Every person is somehow seeking that, because every person is because of that ground of being.
Exactly. We're going to shift over here through just a couple of comments coming in on a question. So lovely Reverend Ashley, just saying there, talking my mystical language now, Len. Spiritual phenomena is not the exclusive preserve of spiritualism.
No.
Wonderful Matt. And he asks a question here saying, fascinating talk, thank you. You said earlier that people stay the same as they were on Earth when they pass to the spirit world. Do you think good and evil exist in the spirit world?
I'm not comfortable with the word with evil, partly because evil is the word live spelt backwards. So what we understand as being evil is a life lived backwards. So we could describe anyone that doesn't live life with that flourishing of love, if you like, at its center, as living their life backwards, and that word comes out of it. But at the core of all being, there is this God of love. And this is where we have to meet people. And it is, there are people who are so cut off from it, that are so devoid or separated from who and what they are. And we could call that mental illness, or we could call it, being evil or whatever. But at their core, there is something that they love. Does a gunman love his gun? That sort, and somewhere within that, even wars, some people have believed that they were fighting the war for the right reason. So if you again looked at, the First World War was absolute carnage. You read stories about the Battle of the Somme, you can't even begin to imagine the carnage, that was, perpetrated by both sides. There were people charging over no man's land, over 5 bodies deep of the dead, 57,000 wounded on the first day, and yet that battle went on, for 4 months. The battle is evil, but the people that went to fight it believed that they were fighting the war to end all wars, and that if I must die so that others may live, they were willing to do it. So, I believe that in some way we've got to, champion people and champion love so that evil's overcome, which is at the heart of every religion. But the problem that we've got in our modern world, is there's so much mental illness, so many people that are not given the basic necessities of life. And that's where some of this evil comes at. In lots of ways, it is that neglect of the basic rights of human people is endemic in our society. It's there everywhere. We've had that, we've had things like racism that have, corruption or whatever have been described as, being rife in our society. Well, actually, all these things are. Because we're so far away from, living with that first principle in mind, that the world is descending into chaos. With our false images of God taking shape. And, you could sit there and argue, and some people do, oh, that's the devil at work. Well, again, that devil is, and Jordan Peterson talks about this in so many, creative ways, which are actually, very good, very helpful here, where he talks about the devil being an amalgamation of all of our predators and greatest fears. So when we lived in trees, we were attacked by, birds of prey. We had the snake that was, on the ground. When we came out of the trees, the snake would attack us. You also had the big animals that would, and all of that, the scales and everything are all amalgamated into our, this image of the devil. Friedrich Nietzsche was another philosopher that I wanted to talk about. Again, very predominant in Germany in the 1860s, where philosophy was flourishing, was leading the world in all sorts of ways. Wrote a wonderful book about the God beyond good and evil. And I think that that's very, very important, to remember, because if we go back to this idea of God being consciousness coming into awareness, we realize that God is beyond all those things. God isn't on any side in a war. God hasn't decided, that a child should die of cancer in Africa. The belief that some God has would make a very evil God. And there are people in the world that believe that God is like that. And I hope I'm not rambling too much with this, with this answer. But the only way to overcome evil in the world is to overcome evil in ourselves. What is it in ourselves? Because it's this idea of microcosm and macrocosm. What's going on inside me is going on in the world. The greatest gift that I can give the world is to be at peace with myself and the world, and therefore I become a light to the world, and that's healing. Whether I'm sending it out or not, just by being, because that God's flowing through us and is healing the world and is healing everyone that we meet in all sorts of different ways. So the evil that exists in me, and it exists in each and every one of us. I mean, if I grew up in Nazi Germany in 1933 and I was, unemployed, I had no future, no hope, and something came along that united the people and gave me all these things I was searching for, I would have joined in with them. We're all, because that's there within each and every one of us. But what we've got to do is overcome those inclinations, so that what is expressed through us in every way is good. And when we say that, and this is one of the things with spiritualism too, it's a little bit like saying that you're going on a diet and then you open the fridge door. Universe will test you. It's like trying to get a smoker trying to give up smoking. All of a sudden, it's everywhere. As soon as you say that you're on a spiritual pathway, the universe will test you, because it has to. And it's in that struggle. I actually am a great believer in a Hindu belief, which is that it's the part of us that believes that it survives death that does. So if you think of this God that's coming into awareness, consciousness coming into awareness, it is constantly searching for life, but it's sometimes in very violent ways. If you look in nature, nature is very, very violent, which again is why, the whole idea of worshipping God in nature is wrong, because nature is violent. Something to live, something else has to die. But if we look at that in ourselves, to actually flourish, there's parts of us that have to die. Where am I seeking my own aggrandizement? And again, sometimes, within spiritualism, we're talking about this earlier, the idea that, if I get a message that I'm somehow showing that I'm closer to God, or that, I get somehow fame or fortune or whatever it is, nothing could be further from the truth. What you're getting is an opportunity, a privilege, if you like, to help someone else, but an opportunity to allow that energy to flow through you so that you can be good in the world. But everything is ambiguous. This is what I mean by about the God being beyond good and evil. Spiritualism can be used for ill as well as it can be used for good. And we've seen that happen, I'm afraid. We've all got in our hearts that, that person that's hurt us, that person that has, destroyed us emotionally. And sadly, there are too many stories of that in spiritualism. But you've also got to remember that old adage of what doesn't kill you can make you who you are. That you've got to use all these things to fight against them, if you like, and fight for the good. Fight for your eternal life. Fight for that divine spark within you. Fight for that, flourishing of who and what you are. And then we'll get away from evil.
Yeah. I was reading Stanton Moses' Spirit Teachings, and that same question came up in one of the seances there. And long story short, the spirit response was education, education, education. Because they were talking about the death sentence and, how do we cast discarnate souls into the next world, and the next world saying, basically pack it up, because you've got the opportunity here to educate and educate and educate. Keep throwing them to us where we have to do that work.
Until we actually see, this great link, from life to life. One of the things that actually drives me mad is when people talk about two worlds. There isn't two worlds. There's one world, but it's seen and unseen, and there are all sorts of interactions that are often happen unbeknownst to people. And it comes back to what we were talking of earlier. If you allow love to flourish, because of the law of like attracting like, the more that you, develop yourself spiritually, the more you'll be surrounded by people of like mind that would never hurt you anyway.
Yep. A few comments coming in here. Jan Wallace, she says, I'm a divine being having a human experience, as are all people on earth. If everyone realizes, then it would be a happier place to live in. I don't believe in evil, just man's inhumanity towards others.
But that's very well put. And again, that idea of evil and live being, a word spelt backwards, inhumanity, and it's so easy. And in fact, one of the things that's driving me mad about TV at the moment is there are very, very lots of programs that are promoting unspiritual behavior, like lying or cheating, traitors and things like that. I can't watch them because lying is its own, problem. And and we've got politicians now. We know loads of evidence of politicians lying to win an argument. Well, tell the truth. Just tell. That's all you got to do. Tell the truth, and we can deal with it. But lies, you're on very shaky ground with any lie. Yeah. So absolutely true.
And I've always found when I'm dealing with people lying, when that is challenged, when that's brought out into the open, we immediately get the defensive from them, and immediately
what tends to happen is there's this manipulation of reality to justify the lie.
Yeah.
And as I said, that shaky ground, you can't. I mean, there are very difficult things for all of us to deal with. And again, that other one that used to drive me mad, there is no death. And I've done funerals, there is death,
Yeah.
and we've got to deal with that in all sorts of ways. And one of the spiritual ways that we deal with it is by experiencing it. And the more that you experience the one of my favorite poets is a Unitarian minister called James Dillett Freeman, and he talks about that separation being part of the love that will happen at the reunion. And I think that is absolutely true, that when we start to experience all of life and are not afraid to realize that there is death, and it's always a tragedy, it's always too early, it's always painful, we begin to realize that all life matters and that nothing should be taken as, as unimportant. Every life is important to someone.
Wow. Margaret Challenger, she's saying, for many people, their wrongs are justified because they were committed in the name of God. How can this be? Is saying sorry, God, the answer to our bad behavior? And what does the fatherhood of God exactly mean?
There's lots of questions in there. And again, I think, the person that we lie to the most is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we're starting to be honest with ourselves, and some of that again is for good reasons, because of and we've all had trauma in our childhood, but that often leads to this desire to feel worthy. Having been brought up in a Catholic household, I know about Catholic guilt and and trying to make yourself worthy to get into heaven. But once we start being honest with ourselves and we're able to say sorry, then we can actually unite with people. But how often are we willing to hear the sorry of other people? How often are we willing to open our hearts and realize that we all make mistakes? It's very much like, the congregation when you're sitting there in a spiritualist church, go on then prove it to me. Rather than actually realize that they're part of this communication, and that if they're open their hearts and minds, and that the mediums, even the best mediums in the world, get things wrong.
Yeah.
And that getting things wrong, and of course, this is part of the reason why we've got such a bad press when it comes to prophesying the future, because so many things have been wrong, of course, and so many times, if they are right, people they can then go, "Oh, you conjured that up and made it happen." And that, of course, has caused so many problems. But in lots of ways, this is what we're trying to do in spiritualism. The idea that when we tell people there is no death, what we're really saying is you'll live forever, so there's no need for your bad behavior. There's no need for that momentary gain, which might make you feel better for 5 minutes, but in the long run will harm you. That if I say sorry, it might be hurtful for 5 minutes, but in the long run, I'll understand you better and you'll be able to get closer to me and understand myself better. And I think maybe our inability to say sorry or to say no might take us to actually what we've meant by the fatherhood of God. The idea that God is never wrong. God does not make mistakes. So you telling me a child dying in a car accident at 16 is not a mistake? It's not. That's a mistake. For whatever way we want to look at it, that is wrong and something that we need to mourn and grieve and say sorry for. And when we've got, because your father's always right. Your father's, this God that you have as a child knows everything and can do everything. And then when you get older, you realize, no, they're not. No, they're not. And I think that image is something that we need to get away from. And realise that there's much bigger picture.
We have this basic tenet, and I think it's pretty applicable to 99.9% of us, that we have this someone to blame or someone to save us energy.
Yeah.
That displacement, because I always say there's the same person, and it's the person that stares at you in the mirror.
Yeah. And some of that, it comes from our false images of God, like the savior complex. I want to help people, which is the savior complex, in a nutshell. I want to help people. Well, maybe sometimes you're not meant to help people, and the best you can do is help people help themselves. In other words, accompany them on their journey, allow them to say sorry and be who and what they are with all their faults, foibles and mistakes, which is actually what love is. That's what God does for us. Loves us exactly as we are, who we are, and is on our side, even when I'm wrong. Even when I make mistakes, he's still there, hoping that my life will flourish in new and exciting ways. Once we realise that, that God is operating in each and every person's life, in each and every aspect of life.
Yeah.
That for me makes life exciting.
Again, Len, you're telling me and you're sharing so much here. My tired old brain is busy trying to put it all into an order and understanding. Absolutely awesome.
Well, with this sort of thing, there's all sorts of avenues that we can, go off in this. And if people have questions later on, they can always, get in touch and, we'll try and answer them. But I just think it is, because of its importance, there's so much, because for me, it's the central principle of spiritualism. If you ask people what the most important part of a spiritualist service is, they'll tell you it's the mediumship. And then they'll say, you say, no, it's the prayer. It's the, no. But the most important part of it is the prayer. Why is it the prayer? Because the prayer not just sets your intention, but it also is meant to unite you in common purpose. We're all meant to be of common purpose because all of humanity is one family. But look at the world now and you realise that we're not acting as a family. We're all acting as estranged teenagers that are too busy fighting to get on. And we've had that happen in spiritualism too, which, the sooner it stops, the better, really.
Yeah.
Because everybody's got something to offer.
Exactly. And it is, it's approaching things when we work with that open heart and without our conditions being brought in. And that reflects in our evidential mediumship as well. We have that information come in and we want to make it into a story that we understand. Well, actually, it's not our story, it's their story. So shut up.
That surely is one of the points behind a demonstration of mediumship. There could be 70 people there. There might only be 5 people that get messages, but you're involved in every one. But how many people turn themselves off? And, and again, if you think of this as being a flow, like a river or like a stream, this consciousness coming into awareness, it's not the message that's the be all and end all. It's this stream flowing into this ocean, and the ocean is divine love. And we're part of that stream, and we're part of, if you like, the tap that turns it on and gets it flowing. And we're all involved in that. And the most important people in a demonstration are those that will sit there and be absolutely enthralled and give all their energy to what's going on and actually be excited by it, But sometimes we look dead.
Very true. Quick hi there from lovely Amory Bond. Good evening, my darling.
Yep.
Dan Wallace makes an observation, going back a couple of sentences, a very dysfunctional family at present. Why?
For me, and that, the idea of family, because we've lost the idea of conversation, the idea of loving someone, even though they've got a difference of opinion to me. Like, so what? Or the idea that if I don't like someone, I have to stop loving them. It's like, I mean, it's just so childish that we've got to grow up emotionally to be able to overcome it. That we've got to let people, be who and what they are at the present time to disagree with us. Because sometimes, I remember once listening to a conversation, it wasn't important what somebody said, but they, whatever they said, somebody looked at him and said, I don't agree with that. And he thought for a minute and he went, no, neither do I really. And then you can move on. The only way that we really learn is by expressing something which gives us the idea, to investigate it and to learn it ourselves. And then, it's like the idea that every message we're giving, the real message that we're giving as mediums is to ourselves. How many times when you're given a message, is it your memory that you're using to pass on to someone else? Is it your experience? And you're thinking, oh, yeah, I'm telling myself this. So the more experiences you have, the better, more variety in your messages you can give. Which is absolutely fascinating. It means that this God who is love, seeking awareness, seeks expression in my life, which is what each and every one of us want, really.
Yeah. I've always said, the messages are another representation that nothing is ever lost.
No.
Nothing is ever lost.
No. And again, you'll find that in Silver Birch's books where he talks about that message, that voice going out through the universe. We know that from recordings that, somewhere on some planet far away, they're listening to all of this, and pricking up their ears. And I think, that's very important because we know energy doesn't die, but we also know it never ever stays the same.
Yeah.
It never ever. And that's our life. Our life is a journey. Our eternal life is a journey. We know from the spirit world, and I keep going back to Silver Birch's books. I think, they're unequaled in how they describe the spirit world, because they talk about this progression through the spirit world onwards and upwards to higher and higher, planes. And that when we sit in a circle, there's a circle in the spirit world sitting, and a circle above them sitting, and a circle above them, to planes that we can't even comprehend right now. And we seem to have forgotten all this. It's like the spirit world are at our beck and call and at our service. We say we're serving them, but we expect them to turn up at the top of a hat and just do all this, stuff for us, as if they've got nothing better to do. There's probably a reason why we don't hear from certain people when they get to the spirit world, because they're in other, forms of service, living, their life in ways we can't even comprehend yet. And if we comprehended them now, would there be eternal life? Because we'd have an idea of exactly what it was like, so therefore we'd have lived it. There are experiences in the spirit world that we can only marvel at right now, but one day we'll experience, if we allow ourselves to.
Yeah.
Or we can surround ourselves in darkness, and that's that point about, fighting for eternal life, fighting for the good. And it's a very bad analogy because I'm using the word, fight, because it really is, a desire, if you like, an intention, which takes us back to the prayer, the idea that our focus. Ernest Holmes talks about where the mind goes, energy flows. So what we put our minds on is where energy flows to. And when we start thinking of that, the more we concentrate on that, and we know this in all sorts of ways, because the more I think about my mediumship, the more I'm involved in it, and it starts to grow and flourish, and, but what is it that we're putting our minds to? How are we spending our time? And what are we watching? Like I said, with those, TV shows that, at the moment, some of them can rot us spiritually, So we have to be careful.
Yeah, we've got to be very mindful of our environment.
Yeah.
what we're taking in from our environment, be it on the TV, be it through books, be it through internet, be it through our social circle. It's a very common thing that people feel really uncomfortable, where they feel like people around them have changed. So again, it's this displacement. Oh, they've changed, so I can't get on with them anymore. Rather than saying, do you know what, I'm changing. Thank you. You know, we've had a great time. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. But things are going to keep moving, and I may not be so involved or enamored by you anymore.
I think you're touching on the psychology there, and I'll talk about this in spiritualism in a little while. We don't enjoy other people changing psychologically. You know, it's like a smoker telling another smoker that they're going to give up smoking. All of a sudden, this smoker doesn't want you to quit smoking, because then they feel worse about, and you see this, to a certain extent in mediumship, where, we should be really enjoying the good mediumship of others. We should really enjoying the good artwork of others. But often that green-eyed monster, rears its head, or, the politics that so many of us are boring, in spiritualism, which you've got to have to a certain extent, because every organization, has to be run, somehow. And it's not always a pretty, thing, because somebody's got to be told no, and somebody's got to be told you're not quite ready yet. And I think we've lost the real art of knowing how to do that. Like if you looked at the development circles, Gordon Higginson's church, he had so many that were running, but he would also put his, hand on somebody's shoulder and go, right, you're now going into the intermediate circle, and, and then of course feel, so nervous or not quite ready. And others, he would say, well, you're not quite ready. I want you to do, But how many of us then are emotionally intelligent enough to hear that no, or to take a step back, or to, and how often do we inflict ourselves on other people when we should be nurturing our own spirit, should be taking that time out to look after our own spirituality? And there are so many times in our lives when we've got to do that because it's important.
That is so true. And I love that word, emotional intelligence. Well, it's 2 words. Yeah. I do love that phrasing.
I don't feel like that, it's something that of course, our generation, emotions didn't exist, especially for men. We were all, off there in the clouds, and reason was everything, wasn't it? And sometimes the pendulum swings rather than actually stops in the middle. But then we're that law of the pendulum, old good Jeff and Ouspensky, we're always seeing this, extremes that we get.
Ashley Oliver brings in, it is easier to demolish than to build. Spiritual envy speaks of the sense of lack in the individual. Spiritual maturity is a huge topic that is unaddressed.
Yeah. That is so, and part of that is our domination of the mediumship. Some of the most spiritual people that you'd meet at a spiritualist church just made the tea. Would bring in a cake every week for people to enjoy, or would be the dog that somebody brought in every week that would be there giving love to absolutely everyone, whatever was going on in their life. And the maturity that these animals show, is so often extraordinary. Us mediums can act like petulant little children. We've all done it from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree totally. It is a path. It is a constant readdressing thoughts. It is a constant self-examination.
Yep. Yeah.
Going away from situations. The more you work with it, I find for myself personally, I can walk away from a situation and I've just got this nagging doubt. I know something could have been better.
Yeah.
Something could have been better, and to sit with that and to look on it and be honest with yourself.
I think part of that has come from our fixation on, personal rights. It's my right, my freedom.
Yeah.
But what about personal responsibility? And that's why it's one of our principles, is because we're all connected. Personal responsibility isn't just about me. I'm responsible for your feelings personally. I am personally responsible for how I make you feel. But how often do we make that into a self-centered, oh, it's nothing to do with me? It comes back to that old idea, which one of the greatest stories in the Bible. Am I my brother's keeper? Cain asked God, and the answer is yes, you are. Because we all are, But how often do we, and it should be that personal awareness comes, from the monitoring of our words. Will these words do kindness? Will these words build someone up? Will these words make someone feel better? Or am I just being destructive? Am I just venting? And there are reasons that we have to vent. I recently went to a lovely seed talk by a doctor who's actually from Manchester about trauma and how trauma is housed in the body. And one of the things that she talked about, which was very interesting, was this idea that we've got, that the only two responses are fight or flight. But she talked about three more. She talked about freeze, fawn, and the other one where, you roll up into a ball, a little bit like hedgehogs do. And that made me, think, because we often, all employ those five traits, but we've only been involved in the fight or flight. This is important when we're talking about emotional intelligence, because fight or flight are the two emotionally unintelligent responses. I either fight you or I run away. You're making me feel uncomfortable, so I will either fight you. And there is, of course, those are the responses in the animal kingdom. Well, freeze, of course, we've probably all done, where we've sat there absolutely silently and we've said absolutely nothing. Or we've rolled up in a ball, which is where we shut ourselves away in the room. We put the music on as loud as we can to make sure no one, can get used to us. Fawn is a very interesting one. It's a little bit like mice that are captured by a cat, and they'll do everything that they can that the cat wants, and they let the cat play with them or whatever, because they realise they can't run away. And often we'll do that as human beings. But those five responses are animal kingdom responses. Now, of course, we are part of the animal kingdom. We still have that. And this is why you can, and sometimes it's talked about in very bad ways, where people talk about that higher self. But our lower self is, of course, our animal kingdom, reactions, the fight, flight, fawn, and I've forgotten the term of it, and freeze. But there is another spiritually mature response, which is getting involved. Get involved in that situation, contribute to that situation. And it might not be in ways that are useful at the time, but if they're not useful, you've learned from it, and you then learn how to contribute even better. But often we're employing those five animal responses rather than using our spiritual senses. It's like when we talk about the mediumistic senses, they of course mirror, if you like, our physical senses. And we have to be careful with that term, spiritual. Like you were talking about earlier, spiritual centers. They're not always spiritual, because anything that can cure you can kill you. Love can kill you. You know, over loving someone can kill them sometimes. And that was the beautiful thing about, you know, someone like Gordon knowing exactly when to put his arm on someone's shoulder, was he also knew when not to.
Mm.
And that knowing when not to is deeply important. Flop. That's it. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah. That was yeah. It just went, but she's lovely. She's doing these seed talks around the country, and her point is that most of our responses, like, and they know this from psychology, you know, overeating, you know, is a trauma response. Our body's seeking comfort. Freud talks about this, you know, and so many people in spiritualism come to mediumship because of trauma.
Mm.
Which finds its way, and what she was talking about, which was so interesting, there was a study on, and they called it ACTS, acute childhood trauma, and there were 12 sources of this acute childhood trauma, you know, from sexual abuse and things like, one of the worst is actually neglect, and emotional neglect, which makes people very, very, you know, emotionally unintelligent. And often brings these 5, you know, animal, you know, reactions to it. But they reckon that this study found that over 80% of people have had at least one of these 12 trauma experiences, and that something like 20% had 4 or more. I mean, it's scary, the amount of trauma, or, for want of a better word, mental illness, because all of those things can lead to, you know, and that's what we come into spiritualism for, is to because of that need to belong, because of that need to feel loved, safe, comforted, you know, etc. And if we can be that to someone else through realizing, you know, ourself, and allowing that energy to flourish through us, then we're beginning to do good in the world, or God in the world. And actually, one thing that always, you know, fascinated me is the etymology of words. The word kind comes from the word kin. Kind, realizing that everyone's kin. So everyone is of one family, so we treat them as such, and we're kind to them. But how often are we not?
Mm.
And that should be, you know, not a source of shame, because shame can cause, you know, its own trauma in the body, but a source of encouragement to do better in the future. Because whilst energy always changes, that experience is gone. I've been forgiven. I can move on. But next time I encounter this person who rubs me up the wrong way, I can endeavour to be different.
That is a really difficult lesson. It is doable.
Yep.
It is doable.
There are places that you can try. My current playground, if you like, or learning, is shopping. Driving was always, you know, my playground. Someone pulls out on you, and you know what men are like. But now you keep yourself calm. But I'm finding that in shopping now, especially if you're doing it first thing in the morning, where all the personal shoppers are absolutely everywhere and you can't get in anything. And I have to count to 10 every now and then. No, they're just doing a job. And yeah.
This touches on a very salient point as well. It's about taking the philosophy of spiritualism, not switching it on when you walk into the church and switching it off when you walk out of the church, which is something, sadly, we are seeing more and more. It is very hard to be that spiritual person existing in this world, but it is not impossible.
It's not, and we have an eternity to learn it. But it's a good job, good thing to start now. Don't leave it off till tomorrow. Start it now. You'll get lots of more opportunities. But today, and that's that point about living in the moment, which is why that Eckhart Tolle, you know, stuff is so important. Because if you're in touch with this ground of all being, you realize that energy that's flowing will not leave anything alone. that all that was in the past, whilst it's still traveling on, it's going away from you. You're forgiven. You have the next opportunity, to express what is highest and noblest and best about who and what you are. And if you take that opportunity, then you're not doing too bad. But the first thing is you've got to notice them.
Yeah, that is a biggie.
What you've done, and that was what we were talking about earlier. How often are we, unaware of how our words are heard? You've got this thing going on in the modern world where you'll talk to people and people say, "Do you know what I mean?" And they haven't actually said anything yet, and you're thinking, "So I've got to tell you what you mean so that I understand." And it's all communication at the moment is just. Not great. Maybe technology's caused that. I'm not a great fan of technology, but that's another story.
I think that has got a big hand in the way we live today, and of course, it culminated then in 2020. Not only was the only form of communication through technology, we were isolated from people, and we are going back to our animal. We are a herd.
Yeah,
we are a kin, we are a family, and to have that severed left an awful lot of mess. Still very much prevalent in today's world.
Yeah.
And it's by learning and understanding and going into what we do as spiritualism, and this can be applied to any facet of life. It doesn't matter what it is, but at that core, if we can culture and foster that understanding, that, looking at things through that different lens, not looking at things as a territorial issue or whatever, and just beginning to, and understand that, we're not going to get it all right. We're not going to be perfect, but that's fine.
Yeah. No, and it's fascinating. And this is one of the things that, I'm trying to encourage with this, this talk. And as you were talking, it made me think of something that Gordon used to do. It was always fascinating, where he used to sit, where he was doing a demonstration. He used to do this often at the hall as well in the library. He'd sit there for a little while, to sit in that ground of all being, to feel the energy and the vibration of the place. And there were times when he would do the demonstration before anyone got in there. So they would turn up, and there would be a little envelope under the seat of the people that got the message, and the message was all there. So he didn't actually do the demonstration with them sitting there. He did it before they sat there, because, of course, once you're touching that ground of being, and you're in that space, time and past, present, and future. We know this with quantum physics. And I don't think there's mediums about at the moment. I don't know if I couldn't do it, but the accuracy that he used to get just by sitting there and doing that was extraordinary.
I want to give it a go.
Yeah, well, but he only learned how to do it by learning how to do it.
Exactly.
And that's the point of our demonstrations. People come as if they're watching a telly and like that this is the finished article and that's everything. No, what you're doing is helping the medium, demonstrate as much as you are helping the medium develop and helping the church flourish and allowing that energy to manifest in this place and time and space so that it can have an effect around the world, which is, of course, again, what our healers are doing.
Yep, definitely.
But until we get experiments like that again, there's a challenge.
Ashley knows me. Thank you, Ashley.
That's the thing. You've actually seen that. You've got to do it.
Oh gosh, I can't go back over this conversation because there's just been so much information there.
Yeah.
Hopefully, too, with the knowledge that we can apply to it as listeners.
Yep.
In our earlier conversation, we have access now to so much information, which is wonderful, but we need the knowledge to make it applicable and to apply that information, because we do tend to go, people will read something verbatim and quote that, And when you actually say, well, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. That's what he said.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it said.
It's like when you say to people, why do you want to be a medium? Oh, I thought it might be good. But that's not a reason. Like, that getting them to investigate. And what you'll find, is with lots of people that as this starts to settle, there'll be doubts and there'll be questions and there'll be issues with what I've said, which is all right and normal because that's how, these ideas are developed, and so we'll need to hold another session, later on, so that those things can be addressed, because we'll all learn together as we allow these things to settle in our mind. But there's two other things that I wanted to talk about, at some later date, because what I've been fascinated with. Is one thing that spiritualism gets fixated on is this date of March the 31st, 1848. And I've often been contemplate, well, was there anything before? And if there was, what was it like? And I've been doing a great deal of investigation into that, which, it's been one thing that I found, which from my background as well, where mediums, the local priest used to be your local medium. Used to be your local seer, and they would go and see the priest for the healing. Of course, they had the time to do it, and they were the ones that were sitting in the silence. But there's so many other historical, instances of mediumship and the history of mediumship, which are not even in Finley's Curse of Ignorance. Some of them are, but. I've been investigating that thoroughly, which I'd like to look at, and I've been fascinated as well with Christian mysticism, not just Teresa of Avila and Joan the Maid, Joan of Arc, but there are so many different instances, like Padre Pio, who used to bilocate. There was stories of him appearing in Rome. He'd never left his monastery in Bologna, and he would appear, in Rome and listen to somebody's confession, and then later on somebody would recognise that it was him, or and he knew that he'd done it. Many instances of him bilocating, and of course, the church is very, very deeply, invested in investigating people that after they've died, for what miracles happen, and so many miracles have to happen for somebody to be canonized. Now, of course, they don't call them mediumship, and they don't would never classify it as that. And of course, the one that's just been seen as genuine, was the one in Croatia after the war. We had the visions there at Medjugorje, and there was a lady there that claimed that she was seeing the Virgin Mary, weekly, which the church has actually now said that there are some genuineness to this, and I was fascinated by how many instances. Pardon me. Historically, there were of Mary appearing throughout history. I mean, we know of Lourdes, and we know of, around this country, lots of them were quashed after the Henrican Reformation, and in this country, the abolition of the absolution of the monasteries. But you've got places. Up here, the name's totally gone from my head at the moment. But wherever you see Holywell, that there were visions of Mary, and she seemed to have been a great deal more involved in the world, for 2,000 years than Jesus was. And I was fascinated by how often people's belief influenced what they would see from the other world. And I think it's hugely, it's not just fascinating, but because the spirit world have our best, being at heart. And so they've got the best of intention for us and would never ever scare us, which is why I get so fed up with haunting phenomena and all the rest. There's all sorts of different things going on there. But one of the things that I've come to realize more and more is that what we're talking about was what Jesus was involved with. And you'll find this hugely in Jung, where Jung talks about how the apostles and the people that surrounded Jesus were the people that didn't get it. And we'll know this from reading the scripture that we've got this, these ideas. Like, for instance, Jesus goes up at the transfiguration and you get Elijah and Moses that materialize, and Peter starts babbling about, building tabernacles and, and all that, because he's so excited about what he's seen. But what Jesus is involved in is this raising of consciousness, this awareness that he hasn't ever sought, to prove life after death, or because it didn't interest him. To him, that was a given. It was just, natural. It was the religion that he'd been brought up in and was as evident as breathing was to him. But what he was involved in was raising our consciousness to do the things that you were talking about, self-examination and, personal responsibility and this communion with all life. And one of the things that has always held life back is the imposition of my opinion on other people, rather than let them have. And people, especially in the modern world, have not got this quite right in their heads, the difference between truth and opinion. Now, we suffer with the idea of Occam's razor, which is that two things can't be true at one and the same time. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. So we seem to think that because we've disproved something, or we proved something, we've disproved something, and so on. But what we now know is that there's a hierarchy of truths, that there seems to be these truths that stack up one on top of the other. Is that what we're seeing with the realms of spirit that Silver Birch, talks about? So those are the things that I want to talk about, at a later date, if that's okay. And I can share some of that with you some more.
Most definitely. I was reading recently Arthur Findlay and the Roots of Religion, and fascinating part I was blithely unaware to was the Pauline, who were the precursor to the Christians.
Yeah.
And the way they operated was the people that ran the temples or the meeting places, they were nothing special. They weren't given any high estate or anything. Ordinary working people who would precede the gathering, bring the gathering together. And the speakers the whole time was what we would call today trance mediumship. And it was philosophy. It was about uplifting the thought, uplifting the consciousness. And that was it. Yeah. And I found that absolutely fascinating. That's in the roots of Christianity. It wasn't until...
Yeah, but then destroy. I mean, there are lots of stories about that. You have to, at times, you have to be careful about early church history. It's a little bit like, the relics of Jesus that were absolutely everywhere. I think there was 18 churches in Rome that said they had the head of John the Baptist, and there were weird and wonderful things like, Mary's breast milk that were everywhere. So you have to be careful in the. It's a little bit like the hyperbole that you had. There's many stories of saints who had their head cut off only for their head to be put back on, and that they live and flourish, and so we have to be careful about some of the early church history there. And of course, one thing that Finlay talks about is about how all religions, were started from mediumship. Paul definitely was, but I don't know that all religions were. We've got no evidence of, of Jesus having any experience. But did he touch this ground of being? I think so. But does that mean that he communicated with this God the Father? That again is another stretch. But one of the interesting things in Buddhism, you'll find this in that Kundan movie, which is about the finding of the reincarnated Lama, the 16th Dalai Lama, who we've currently got, and how they found him. Well, in the temple at Lhasa, before the Chinese came, every year one of the monks would fall into trance and tell the whole gathered monastery what was going to happen in the coming year. They built up that big mandala, which Jung was very into the mandalas and the healing power of them. The idea that life follows patterns and a little bit like a kaleidoscope. But they build them, and it can take them months and months to build this mandala in these Buddhist temples. This monk goes into trance, tells them all what's going to happen, and then what they do with this mandala, they just destroy it, which is reminiscent of the whole Hindu idea of Shiva, the god of destroying, the idea of our life being constantly moving, which is actually the story of Jesus, which is about the process of life, death, and rebirth, which we go through every day in miniature. We fall asleep, we get up again, and we don't have the same experiences as yesterday, but by God do we bring them with us and make them more important, rather than live in this now and this moment and allow it to have all of the opportunities that it brings. And that process of life, death, and rebirth is constantly happening. And we constantly, are being reincarnated. St. Francis used to talk about how that process of life was happening every day in miniature.
Yeah.
And I find that all fascinating, the link that's there, between them all. It's like with Glyn, when we used to teach on, go on Glyn's weeks, Glenn would take us to this Hindu temple in East London, and it didn't look like anything. It was an ordinary house, but you went inside, and this this Hindu whatever he was, I can't even think of their term. One went to see him, and he said to her, "You lost the ring." 30 years ago, and he held out his hand, and there it was. Apparently imported through so it was happening all over the place. And it was just for them, it was just, don't get hooked up on this, sign and wonder. That the whole point of it is that you're a divine being who matters to another world more than you think.
Mm.
And we take all of this for granted.
It brings my thinking, excuse me, one of the most commonest things, and from what's being said tonight, people are going to say, why don't we see that today? Why don't we have that today? Why don't we have this today? I think there's two things from tonight's talk which support or add to my thinking. Number one, that was then, and this is now. We're talking about two different totally things.
Absolutely, where physical mediumship's concerned.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Number two, we can see, we'll call it the damage that the phenomena of evidential mediumship has done to spiritualism, because people have got hooked on this phenomena. Oh, that was a good message. I'll come back next week and see if I can get something better. The learning isn't there.
And that comes back to the personal responsibility. And this was a fascinating story for me. General Haig, because I've just been reading the book on the First World War. General Haig's sister was very much into mediumship, and his sister had seen a medium who said that General Haig was being influenced by the other world by Napoleon. And this was just before the Battle of the Somme. Did that influence him at all to believe that he could not make any mistake, and that all of his plans and actions? And if you read the story of the Somme, it's horrific. Absolutely horrific. Napoleon might well have been there, but why didn't Napoleon say, don't go and attack on the Somme because 57,000 people on day one are going to be injured or killed. 18,000 were killed, 57,000, and that was day one. And the battle went on for 4 months. Why didn't the spirit world warn him of that? And again, you could conjecture and come up with all sorts of theories. But one thing that I do know is that for spiritual growth to come, we often go through a time of crisis. That time of crisis, and this is this point about life, death, and rebirth, that time of crisis can appear like a crucifixion. How many people stayed when Jesus was crucified? No one. They all vanished, and apparently they were his, closest friends and closest followers. They vanished as quickly as that because it didn't serve them. And how often do we do that when people are going through a time of crisis? And again, we see that process. Spiritualism has it close to its heart, life, death, and rebirth. And we cheapen it at times by saying there is no death. There is. It's important. Because for something to live, something must die. But what is it is going to be born out of the ashes. A phoenix that will rise. And that, again, we're back to Greek philosophy. Does something go to the underworld, or does it, rise up and allow the world to flourish? It's fascinating.
Len.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely amazing evening.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. With your permission, I'd like to release this also as a podcast later on, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, you can do. And I mean, I have worked long and hard on overcoming my false images of God. And one of the best things that helped me emotionally, but also spiritually and mediumistically, was therapy. And we're living in an age where, and you have to be very, very careful. But if people, wanted to do something, I can offer, counselling session. I'm not a trained counsellor, whilst I've studied psychology or whatever. I'm working with my mediumship again, but they can, get in touch, or I don't know how just yet because I haven't got a Facebook page up and running, but we can go from there. But let me know when you want to do another evening, and we can talk about one of those topics that I suggested.
Most definitely, and we will talk once off air and just see where this can go, because it's exciting.
Yeah,
I love this approach, and
that idea can lead to all sorts of things. Like in your church, events where you don't just have mediumship.
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah, which it's so important, because your church is a hub of the community. That's why they used to call them things like the light on the hill. And now it seems so, like ever said Tweed, doesn't it? But yeah, I mean, when you think of the old mediums like Gordon on Boxing Day, he would do a trance demonstration every year at the church. And people used to flock for miles around, and we need to experience that again in the modern world.
Definitely, and we need to culture and support this. Is not all the message.
Yep, absolutely.
Not all this. That's a piece of the puzzle.
Yep. So we've done a lot. It's almost time for the football and my need for a rest.
Len, thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. I've just so much from tonight. Thank you, everybody who has been part of the night tonight, and also those who will watch on catch up later on, and also those who will be listening into the podcast that will be released over the next 12 hours. Len, thank you. Oh, people have been on through the beginning. Well done. Good stamina. Thank you. Amazing evening, and so good to be back in your company again.
Good stuff.
Yeah, you
We'll
take care.
speak again soon.
Most definitely.
I can go and put something good in my glass.
Funny you should say that.